This is the Change Physician, episode 199.
Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Change Physician podcast. As your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my amazeballs co-host, Dr. Melissa Katie. Dr. Katie, how are you today?
I'm good. I think I'm in a pensive mood.
Mood.
So I wanted to bring up some thoughts I had because this last week, sometimes every once in a while, I think we all think about where we put our time and, where is it worth our time or is it valuable to others? And this podcast is no different. And I think that there was, these thoughts on the way we have it structured and how we've been, which episodes we've been sharing. And it doesn't always, I can't say I'm the best at like tracking like views from who and from where, but then I was, you don't always realize if you're not tracking all that, how many people are, listening, or do they like it, or do they find benefit to it? And so you and I had these conversations about like how we see the future of the podcast, and everything's always evolving. I think it's always changing. And, but the universe, and I just have to tie it into your background, has spoken to me in a few ways this past week. And it's funny, right when you need it. A good friend who's a practicing physician, you know who you are, reminded me that there was a lot of things that you were learning from what we were sharing, whether it's people we interviewed, and actually it's nice because I've had questions from this person, other people, such as Dr. Stephanie Pearson with disability, and I've referred so many people to her. And so they're very grateful for that kind of resource. And then I got another, of all places, my husband talking to a mutual friend who happens to be a physician. You know who you are if you're listening to this episode, which I'm sure you will eventually, was having a tough week and happened to mention, without my husband even asking, that she felt like the podcast made a huge difference and kind of saved her that week from a really hard time. And that, of course, just, makes me feel like it's all worth it. This is someone I care about, that I know about. Of course, we care about all our fellow physicians out there, but this one kind of came close to home. And what is funny, and I hadn't mentioned to you, Kevin, yet, is that my husband said, yeah, she's been trying to decide, like how they're going to do the podcast, if it should continue long term. And she's like, well, that's not even an option. So I got to talk to her. This gotta just keep on going. So like, okay, well, so I guess my point behind all of that is that somehow, some way, and myself included, we might undervalue the kind of work that we're doing. And maybe it's because we're, have all these other things. We're always trying to prioritize, where we put our time and the value exchange there. And of course, I always love talking to you, Kevin. So like, even if we didn't record, it wouldn't matter. But, there's a little bit of effort, obviously, to kind of edit these things, put things out there, stay relatively organized and be consistent. And so that's kind of my my first thought, and it played into another story too. But I know you just wrote something down, or is there something you were gonna say about that?
I just have little things I want to mention, and I'm letting you.
Okay, you want me to just keep rolling?
Well, whenever you're done, okay. Or whenever you want to hand off the ball, it's like.
Yeah, I guess I feel like there is times that even other physicians are, they get so frustrated with the whole medical system, and you feel like you're just, going uphill and you're trying to make a difference. And sometimes you feel like you just can't make a difference. And I guess the thing I see is that when you show, even in your mind, when you think that you're not making difference, because you don't always hear it from the people. I just happened to hear from two people this past week that helped reinforce the fact that, yes, this makes a difference. But then you start to think, the mere fact that you care about people, that you're acknowledging them, that you're demonstrating compassion, people benefit from that. And it's not always reciprocated in a, God, you just made my day. Like, there's things that like that happen. Maybe you don't necessarily hear it back for whatever reason. Could be a time issue. But I think there's so many, I think there's a little bit of faith and understanding that there is a huge benefit to society, to individuals, by the mere fact you show up, you put in the effort, you show that you care. And the fact that they keep coming back to you, that probably shows you something, but unless it's related to insurance, because you're the only person they see, but let's just say they enjoy your company, or they enjoy the fact that you really take interest in their lives. I felt like there was a good message in there to remind people that you are making a difference many times, even if you're not hearing about it. And before this past week, before I heard these two things, I was making a difference. The only difference was I heard it from someone that told it to my brain. So yeah, I think there's a lot to I just want to remind people that this is an incredibly a common phenomenon. And what are your thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, so basically, I think what you're saying is it's very easy in your day-to-day existence to think that the things that you're doing routinely over time aren't making a difference, and why are you doing them? And so as a physician, we may be doing that in our practices, going, I'm saying the same thing every day. Everybody seems to be sick. Why the hell am I doing this? You may be showing up to work if you're not a physician and going, I'm doing, am I actually making a difference here? Or am I just plugging a little time card here? Is it really making a difference? And that's pretty universal, I think. And one of the things that you talked about, though, very, very early on, the thing that I actually wrote down was tracking. So like for the podcast, and for a specific example for us, everybody, you're doing work, and we're putting ourselves out here, and we're up to 199 episodes. And it's sort of this invisible thing. You get some feedback here and there. We're not like professionals, so we're not tracking data. We probably should be.
Yeah.
Because when you track something, what that does is provide some objective information that counters what your subjective bias is going to be. And in this specific scenario, like, we've all been there. We all think that we're not doing something that's important. And part of that reason is something called negativity bias. Our brains are programmed to see the negative and are less likely to pay attention to the positive, sort of like negative versus positive reinforcement. And so we don't know if we're making a difference. And instead, what we do tend to hear is those negative interactions, when we get the negative reviews, when we have the patient complaints that are coming through the door, and that grabs our attention. And so if when we have that feedback, so like you're saying, is you have these you heard through the ethers about, oh my God, someone actually is listening to this podcast, and we should keep doing what we're doing, right? That provides a little different bit of input as compared to the negative focuses. I'm doing this every day. I don't know. Nobody is. I don't even know what the podcast things is. There's some podcast award. Nobody's giving us the Academy Awards for podcasting, and Oprah's not flying in to interview us or whatever. So you're like, what are we doing? So that having some bit of objectivity and tracking is an important thing. The other part that I think is really fascinating is, as physicians, we all tend to question, like, what the hell we're doing, but the key interactions are often the ones that we're not aware of. Like, as we practice over time and get some experience, it's the weirdest thing where people come out of the blue and say, hey, you said this and it really made a difference. And you're like, I just said whatever it is that I said, right? and it kind of reminds me of those people, like, you never like smile. I'm not a great smiler, people. I try. But you never know what the influence is going to be. You may walk through somebody who doesn't even know who you are, and you may smile to them, and that little smile that you make may make a profound difference in that person's life. Are we going to be aware of it? No, but so it's like these little ripples and repercussions that we're completely unaware of.
Yeah. Okay. Can I interrupt that?
Oh, absolutely.
I've got two smiling stories.
Two smiling stories. All right.
Yes. So first one, which I mentioned to you before we went on air, was essentially I don't know which state, but there was a police officer that would make rounds in the neighborhood, would see this young girl, like a teenager, and she would always smile and wave, and he'd smile and wave back. And, it was a routine. And eventually one day he saw that she wasn't, waving, and she raised her two young little, brother and sister, and her mom's working all the time. So he's like, oh, something's not right. And so he went in cautiously to the home and then saw that she was down, unconscious. Turned out she was malnourished. They struggled as a family and all of that. 20 years later, this young child finally found this police officer and wanted to meet him. Turns out she's become a police officer to make a difference. And she finds out that he was about to quit being a police officer because he didn't feel like he made a difference. And because of that interaction, because of what she did a little bit on social media, they found out and had other people giving testimonials of how he saved their lives as well, or made a huge impact on them. And so just the ripple effect that happened from acknowledgement of somebody interacting, showing appreciation, and all of that creates this joy that, it started with a smile and a wave, and maybe some respect for the police officer from the child or whatever it was. The second smiling story was a toddler that always loved to wave at this garbage. Have you heard this one?
No, keep going.
Okay.
I just thinking about a little waving toddler, and it just makes me laugh because they're so cute.
Yeah, little waving toddler through the window, because the garbage truck man would always ding, ding, honk, honk, and wave and smile. Huge smile, like, Colgate smile. I'm not, promoting Colgate, but anyway, so it happened all the time. And the mom said that this toddler would like always want to be there right when he comes. And so then it got to the point where she wanted to get closer to the truck. And then eventually she told her mom that she wanted to meet this garbage truck man. Well, then she had her birthday, I think third or fourth birthday, whatever. But it wasn't the day for the pickup. So she was determined to somehow have some cupcake with this garbage man. So they eventually met. He eats there's like pictures of this story. It's heartwarming. But anyway, so she ends up sharing the cupcake. And then he comes back next time and brings her like the Frozen collection that she loves, whatever, and gave her a birthday gift, the garbage man. And then this thing keeps going, and she wanted to say thank you, so she had a big poster. So then there's like the thank you to the garbage man, and he wants to put it on the truck so everyone in the neighborhoods can see it. And so anyway, it kept going and going and going. Turns out that this guy was trying to earn his real estate license. He ends up becoming a motivational speaker, and I mean, you kind of just see these lives that are just positively impacted by people that just said hi, waved, were generous to each other. And there was something else. The mother had said after that first day she met, and she was driving off with her mom, and she was in the back seat, and the daughter's usually not quiet. She was all quiet. She said, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, okay." "This is just like, I'm just so happy," is what she said. Like the joy she got from like finally meeting her like hero. Anyway, it's sometimes those little gestures, showing you care, connecting, giving people the value of your time, can be sometimes the most powerful impact on other humans. And I think we overlook that part because it's not part of that negativity, bias that you're talking about. So anyway, you said smile. And oh my gosh, I had to share those two stories because they're very heartwarming. So.
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. Now I'm like wondering, okay, there's got to be some research on this stuff, like which professions is these kind of little existential crises about, am I making a difference in? Actually, one of our other friends, Dave Hanscom, talks about this a lot with people who are doing God, what is it called when you're really trying to make a difference, like not reforming, but there's a word for it. I forgot. It's like the people who are like champion hard things. What the hell is that called?
I think you have to be, I mean, he could have been just any garbage man and just be miserable or not feel like he makes a difference because of what he does. Like, but it's important. We need people that pick up the trash. But he went above and beyond. Like he made an effort to connect with the community and feel like he's of value. I don't know. There's something in some people, I guess, that do it anyway, but
what I'm basically saying is people who, there's all these opportunities we have to make differences, right? But there are certain professions where the goal of the profession is to make a difference. So I wish I'm not blanking on the word.
There's a special word.
There's a special group there. I mean, the people who are like going after climate change, people who are trying to end hunger, the people who are trying to like fundamentally like shift culture, have an extraordinarily high burnout rate. Medicine, I think, and this is what I would love to go into the data a little bit more and actually research this. We have a high burnout rate, but I'm pretty sure I'd be shocked that one of the reasons for that, and you kind of look at burnout in a couple of ways, is perceived responsibility for outcome and perceived control over that outcome. So if you have high perceived control and you have high perceived responsibility, that's the kind of the happiness place. But that means you like, yes, I'm making a difference every day.
Yeah.
When you have high perceived responsibility, but low perceived control over that outcome, in the occupational data, that's where burnout occurs. Yeah. Because now you have this high degree of responsibility, but you do not have this, the factors necessary to create change.
Right.
So, and when you look at medicine, we have a lot of things that we have this high degree of perceived responsibility for, that we have low degrees of actual ability to change. Okay. Yeah. And there are things, and one of the shifts that you can do is focus on what it is that you can directly impact and change, and focus on that outcome. Right. Yeah. This is really like, if you're looking at things like pain, right? The whole, the fifth vital sign and those other BS that was incorporated.
Yeah.
Pain, particularly persistent pain. Pain is an experience. Persistent pain is a very complex phenomenon. But physicians have been told for 20 plus years now that we are responsible for somebody else's experience of pain. We have very little control over that. And when you look at the actual outcomes that we can directly do, look, cut, poke, drug, etc., the efficacy for them for persistent pain is essentially zero, nada. And I'm talking about persistent pain stuff. So then when you're looking at a primary care setting and people are coming with persistent pain and they're looking for help, in the modalities in our toolbox, we can do imaging, lab work, we can do injections, we can prescribe medications. The things that we directly control have very little efficacy. Now you are being, hey, you're responsible for this, but they have no control over the outcome. Yeah. So huge interplay there. And that's a lot of the stuff that we're doing in medicine is the same way. Diet and exercise, obesity is very similar. It's an emergent phenomenon. It's complex. And then you come in and people are coming in who are obese and you're recommending some sort of change. And the typical modalities that we have that direct control over have low efficacy for. And then we pull away time because now everybody's being treated like a widget and you're packing your schedule full of it. You can't spend the time to actually do motivational interviewing. You can't do frequent follow-up appointments to do measured change strategies and things like that. It's super easy for people to feel burned out in. And so we have kind of shifted the conversation to this idea of burnout. But what you also then, to kind of return to the main topic of knowing what your value is, understand what it is that you can and what it is that you can't do. Make sure that you are measuring something. And so measurements here is, we tend to, again, that negativity bias, at the end of your day, you will always focus on the worst patient interaction generally. There's a very few, like the super optimists, and I don't know, there's probably a problem with that. The ones who only see, actually, I can think right off the top of my head. If you're only focusing on your positive outcomes, you're going to have a totally skewed vision of reality. And generally, you may not recognize it. People around you are going to go, that person is quack. Like, I'm just thinking about that because there was one guy who said everything he ever did, this is when I was doing pain stuff, everything he did worked and always made except I'm like, saw his patients. And I'm like, dude, this ain't working. I don't know where you're coming from on this, but he was living in this little skewed reality world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so it's to understand you're going to feel like you're not making a difference. One of the reasons is you're not feeling like you're making a difference is because you're going to have this focus on negativity. A couple of the key strategies that you can do to overcome that in the moment is to focus on the things that you have direct control over and can do. And the second part is to give yourself some attentional focus. You can either track your interactions, but this is also where gratitude comes in. So at the end of the day, if you're prone to only focus on the negative interactions, try to make a point of write down the most positive interaction that you had with your patients. Oh, I had a new patient today and they didn't have 65 problems. They weren't doctor moving around all over the place. And I had a great interaction where I told them about, hey, if you just take a daily walk, that's going to improve your overall health. And that's a great thing to do. That and simple little teeny things like that is something you can return a focus on. And it's the other part to remember, and particularly if you're new in practice, is you have no idea what seeds you're going to plant and when they're going to sprout. So in my first civilian practice, when I got to the point when I was actually listening to the data and looking at the data when it comes to what we did in persistent pain and going, holy crap, I can't believe this stuff, we're doing all this and there's like negative data, so like actually makes people worse. What I did know was the stuff on chronic opioids. So I didn't understand pain really well. I just didn't know what we were doing was working. But opioids, the more you dig into the data and the more you look at how they work on your neurochemistry of your brain, the more you can kind of say, wait a second, this is not good. And I don't want to get into debate and people are going to flop me. I mean, if you want to talk to me one-on-one, fine. Dr. Kevin at thechangedphysician.com. I'm happy to explain and talk about opioids in much more greater detail, but there's really harmful effects with them long-term. So I would have people come in and I would have these discussions because I cared about them. And I would tell them the reason that I wasn't recommending opioids. And I would tell them the reasons that I didn't prescribe them and why I didn't recommend them for long term and et cetera. And they were really crappy interactions. Like, amazingly enough, if I had to take 10 of them, actually, I should change that. 5 to 7 of 10 were actually pretty good. Like I had one guy I'll never forget. He goes, I don't necessarily agree with you, but I see you care and I appreciate that. But there was always one who wanted to, you suck and you're the most horrible person in the world. And so you're carrying this and going through the day. And then I had a person come back 1 year later. I'll never forget this. She comes in 1 year later and she goes, you said all this stuff. And I didn't believe it. But then a bunch of stuff happened and she goes, you know what? You were actually right. And I'm doing this, and the other thing. I had another one who was a physician, an elder statesman, let me just say, kind of that kind of a thing, who I was seeing because he was doing his doc. He's like, he's taking these opioids, you need to see him. And I gave him the whole spiel. And this physician knew the buzzword. Well, how could you say that? I'm functioning better with them. I mean, all the little kind of buzzwords that we know in medicine you're supposed to say. And I'm like, I'm just going to tell you the data's not here. I don't agree. It's like, okay, whatever. I don't agree with you, but whatever. And so then he's walking like a year later with him. He's walking through the halls. I hear his voice. He's seeing another doctor in the group. I'm like, oh shit. You just know because and then he taps on the door, knocks because I had my door open. He knocks on the door. He's like, hey, do you remember me? And I'm like, yeah, I do remember you. And he said the same thing as he goes, I just want you to know you were right. You were right. I had a problem. I wasn't recognizing it and you were right. So you never know. You literally never know. So even in the most difficult interactions that you have, we create these narratives of I'm not making a difference in the world, but honestly, you don't know. And so unless you get that unless you have those other people tell you you're not making a difference, or unless you have this some sort of objective indicator that says you're not making a difference, and making sure that you also are tracking the positive stuff so that you can then do some little balance sheets on where I am in the world, you honestly just, you don't know. We all feel it. We've all experienced it. It sucks and it returns. So even when you know it, it keeps coming back. But it's just astounding. Like, if once you start looking for counter information to the false narrative that you create in your mind, all of a sudden it starts sprouting out of the woodwork.
Isn't it kind of like, I mean, I'm not a parent, but isn't that kind of like, you know, being a parent where you have some really tough situations at times, but you realize down the road you really did, you know you're making a difference, but it really sucks while you're going through it. You know, it's being a parent.
I would say yes. Yes and no, because there's an important implication here. Because of negativity bias and criticism, right? We are more likely to criticize the behaviors and actions that we don't agree with. If you are critical all the time, that can be detrimental. Mm-hmm. One of the most powerful strategies I've ever learned, and it's hard to do, and you can do this in any sort of relationship that you're experiencing though, is instead of focusing on the things that drive you crazy and criticizing them, focus on the actions that make you happy and praise them. Because you grow, but it's sort of like watering the things that make a difference to you. And the more you water them, the more they tend to grow, versus the more the criticism. I mean, there's sometimes you have to say something, but if you're continually nitpicking and nagging, etc., that's not really watering anything. I guess you can call that pruning. There's like, okay, I've got a new analogy. I got pruning and watering, right? You water the things that you grow and you're pruning the things that you don't want to grow. But if you over prune, you're going to kill it. In the same way, you can't if you're like, if for parenting, if you're just watering and all the time, you can kill it that way, because then you can
just say, give it some, well, you can have too much sun too, I guess. Well,
there's that's a whole nother episode on balance, right? There's everything requires some level of balance and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it is, I guess. So the overall, what you kind of introduce this idea is, people don't recognize the value that you have. There's a high burnout rate associated in healthcare professions, and particularly within physicians. Part of that burnout is related to this idea of how high perceived responsibility over things that you don't have actual high direct control over. I mean, the biggest one though is that negativity bias, and not recognizing that every these little interactions that we have, you can make a big difference on. Like I'm sure. I mean, you've probably been to a restaurant and had a great server. You may not even remember their name, but you just remember the experience was really good. We went to with our really, really good friends, and we went to really, really fine dining, a fantastic restaurant that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore because the chef died. But we had like an amazing time. I don't know who our servers were. We were probably a little bit louder than you're supposed to be in a fancy restaurant. But they really made us feel at home. And then after the dinner, they took us through the kitchen and were taking us all these places, just provide us this amazing experience. Yeah, you just don't, I mean, all these things, you just don't know the impact that you have on other people's lives. You just don't. And so I guess that's a long way to say, when you're feeling down and you don't feel like you're making a difference, the little voice in your own head should say, well, what am I using? What's the data I'm using for this?
Yeah.
And what's the counter data? That's the other thing. Because if you tell your brain, oh, what supports this, it'll find, oh, because I missed this. I have 65,000 tasks in my queue. Mrs. Janes is calling again because she hates me, and da-da-da-da. Well, what's the counter to that? What are the positives then? Well, all the positives. I saw a new kid and they were doing this. Oh, I had this. Oh, this other guy came back and he's actually lost 10 pounds after I told him to start taking a daily walk. Anyway.
Yeah.
Make sure you have counter evidence.
Yeah, you remind me of the direct primary care physicians we've interviewed, and how they've created a different environment and created a sense of more autonomy and control over a lot of the variables. A big one being the time spent with their patients, or the frequency at which they can see them, and the affordability, and all the things kind of win-win on both sides. And so their experience is kind of more like that nice restaurant. They gave you a great experience. These patients are coming into a totally different experience than their traditional medical world that they've been, siphoned through. And, you made me think about too, is the way I've framed my business model and how I've created this built-in feedback kind of cycle that I do. I don't get everyone to give back feedback, but I get a lot of feedback, and I'm building my own little kind of positive. I would say it's pretty much positive, but I would have had that if I didn't kind of try to build a system to be able to review that or to understand what people's experiences are. So, I mean, you may not, you may have to solicit some of that to get that feedback, and you might get unsolicited feedback, which can be really great. But like you said, if there's objective measures that you can follow based on whatever the thing is that you're doing, obviously incredibly valuable. But you also have to stop. You can get consumed by that negativity in a way where you don't even think to look at those other measures or to seek out or to find. So it's a good reminder to myself to, sometimes even if you read it before, go back and reread it. And, even when I wrote a book, like sometimes I can be self-critical, but when I start reading it again, like, parts of my, wow, I really said that really nicely. Like you start thinking, no, it actually wasn't that bad. Yeah, I can make it better and it could be more up to date and all that. But I'm not a bad writer. I'm not perfect. But it's at the same time, it's sometimes you have to kind of like go back to it to tell your brain something positive. So
review, and that's a lot of, if you actually review the scenario again, it's usually not as bad as we thought it was.
Yeah.
Or you talk to other people and you figure out, oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah. Brains are powerful, but
brains are super powerful.
Yeah. Well, any other last comments on my thoughts and stories? And
other than, I'm going to leave it with an exercise. I think I talked a couple other things. This is my thing. I'm going to try to, I want to leave people with a takeaway that they can do. And for this one, when you question your own self-worth, there's an exercise that I would recommend, and that is that gratitude. So people talk about listing three things that you're thankful for each day, right? In gratitude journaling, there's actually data behind it. It's pretty good on improving health and overall kind of well-being. And I'm going to add on to that and said, add on to your gratitude, or things that you're appreciative for that day. The three things that you're appreciative for. The other thing is so that's internal. Then the external would be, think of 3 places that you can make a positive interaction. So every day, try to do 3 positives. That could be as simple as smiling at the cashier, waving at the stranger on the street, hugging your patient. But just if you do 3 small interactions of external positivity, generating that, hey, I appreciate you, and then reflecting on 3 situations that you are great, that you are appreciative for in your day. That's ways that you can sort of kind of build that feeling again of self-worth and meaning. That is pretty easy to do. I'm super into easy stuff. That's my goal in life, is how do we simplify and just do really simple things. So anyway, take it as it is. But gratitude is super powerful. And if there's internal and external, and I would recommend it for this to feel like you have worth in this world, which everybody does.
That's great. I love it. It made me feel, I felt more valued by the end of this podcast for some reason.
Well, you should, and I value you, Melissa, and everybody values you. We got some comments on you. Oh, Melissa, she's so wonderful, Dr. Katie.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Sometimes being showered with those things can be uncomfortable at times. That's the irony of it all too. But I'm grateful for the conversation. I'm glad that we brought up this topic, because I feel like the intangible things are things that we need the most help with at times, because you can look at someone on social media, they look like they have the best life in the world, and they're miserable on the inside. So that's why I like to have these conversations with Kevin, because I think we need to hear it over and over again sometimes, or just be reminded. So I hope you feel valued. If you don't, I'd highly suggest some of the things that Kevin mentioned, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. If you don't know what the Change Physician is all about, please go to the community at thechangephysician.com, whether you're a physician or physician ally, and we'd love to have you there. And until next time, take care.
Stay well, folks.